You're listening to Food Psych, a podcast about nutrition, eating disorders, and body image. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist and certified intuitive eating counselor, specializing in health at every size. Join me as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships to food.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beefing. Now I'm ready for the world, trying to sink my teeth in, stacking it.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 65 of Food Psych. Today I have an awesome guest for you. It's Aaron Flores, a registered dietitian who is the co-host of the Dietitians Unplugged podcast with Glennis Oyston, who's also a former Food Psych guest. And Aaron also has his own private practice in California where he helps people with health at every size and intuitive eating. So really excited to talk with him on the podcast today. We had a great conversation, and I will share that with you in just a moment. First, I have some really exciting announcements about new ways to support the podcast and also engage with the podcast. So as many of you may know who've been listening for a while, I have some premium offerings that are available when you sign up for a Patreon subscription, sign up to support us on Patreon. But I've decided that Patreon doesn't allow for enough engagement and sort of bonus content to be presented in a nice way and also to create a sense of community. So I've actually decided to move all the bonus content that I've been giving to folks on Patreon over to my own website. And I've created a special members only area to house all that stuff. So the Ask Food Psych bonus episodes, which I post every other week for premium subscribers, are now going to live on my website on the special member page, as well as the full season 1 archives. So by the time you're listening to this, season 1 will be unavailable anywhere but as a premium subscription. And season 1 is really interesting and cool because it's where we found our direction and, I started the podcast obviously with the first season and really grew a lot through the first season. And you can hear conversations with some really fascinating people that I don't know if I would talk to now at this point in the podcast. Like I talked to Mark Maron, the comedian behind the WTF podcast, about his mom's anorexia and growing up, thinking he was fat and all this stuff, like really fascinating people. Also the comedian Jackie Cation, for any of you comedy nerds out there. She's like the comedy nerd. I talked to Aisha Tyler, the actress. I was really like focusing on a lot of actors and comedians in the first season. So I had some pretty interesting folks on the show, and those episodes are really fascinating to listen to, and they're now only available as premium content. So you guys can sign up for premium memberships now. Instead of going to Patreon, you can go to my very own website and just go to christyharrison.com/premium. That's christyharrison.com/premium to see all about this new online community that I've created with the podcast. And not only do you get access to the full archives and the Ask Food Psych bonus episodes, but I'm also starting a very cool extra bonus for this online community. And that is I'm going to be offering a monthly group coaching call. So anyone who signs up for a Food Psych premium membership can jump on this monthly call, and we'll be able to discuss anything that comes up on the podcast or anything you want to ask me or, open up to the group for discussion. So I'm still figuring out like the details, the scheduling, and all of that stuff. So the first monthly call will probably be happening in the next several weeks to a month, something like that. But in the meantime, you guys listening can go sign up and get in on the ground floor of this awesome new community. I'm going to be also adding some more features in the months to come to create more of a sense of community, including probably a Facebook group. Once I figure out all the logistics of that in terms of like managing the conversations and making sure nobody's triggering each other and just creating a safe space, because I really want it to be a safe space to support your guys' recovery and journeys to body acceptance and intuitive eating and all of that great stuff. So right now, you guys can sign up for a membership on my site for $29 a month. Just go to christyharrison.com/premium. And those of you who've been supporting the podcast via Patreon from the get-go at the $5 a month level and above are grandfathered in. So I've actually already added you guys to the membership site for no additional fee. Basically, you just stay on your current Patreon plan and you get all the great stuff on the membership site. So it pays to get in on the ground ground floor with this stuff. And for anyone who didn't sign up via Patreon before this window, this cutoff, not to worry. You can still support the podcast on Patreon with any amount of donation you choose. That still really helps me keep making the podcast. But better yet, you can sign up for the online community now going forward, and you'll be getting in on the ground floor with this special deal, because as I add more content to the online community, the price may go up in the future. So starting at $29 a month is a really great deal for the monthly coaching call, the Ask Food Psych bonus episodes, and the continued access to our full first season, plus any other aspects of the community that I add going forward. So check it out. Go to christyharrison.com/premium to sign up today. And then the other way you guys can support the podcast is that I've created a new offering, and some of you I think have already signed up, but I haven't really promoted it on the podcast yet, so I wanted to announce it more widely. I've created a new intuitive eating 5-day email course. So this is like a mini version of my Intuitive Eating Fundamentals 13-week course. It's just 5 days, 5 pro tips on starting your intuitive eating journey. And it's got some of the, selected material from the online course, from the 13-week online course, but in just bite-sized emails that you guys can read at your leisure, and, 5 days worth of content to start your intuitive eating journey. And best of all, this is also appropriate for people who are in recovery from eating disorders and on a meal plan. So all of the exercises and tools I present in the mini course are compatible with early stage recovery from eating disorders, because it's really about starting to tune into your body and just explore how your body feels, and also explore some ideas around emotional eating and the diet mentality and things that, you can really start to address wherever you are in your recovery journey. So the full course, I don't recommend for people who have active eating disorders, because it's really about, letting your cues, your hunger cues and your fullness cues guide you. And of course, when you're in early recovery, those things don't do such a great job of guiding you. You need a meal plan to do that. But with this 5-day mini course, you can totally be on a meal plan. You can be working with a treatment team, and all this material is compatible with what you're already doing. So go check that out and sign up at christyharrison.com/mini course. That's christyharrison.com/mini course. Okay, enough from me. Those are 2 very exciting announcements, but now we have an even more exciting conversation. I talked with Aaron Flores from his home in Calabasas, California, over Skype. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
So it's interesting, because when I read this question that you sent me and I started to think about it, it really brought up a lot of memories, very positive memories about food. Food is, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but, I'm Jewish. And so there's always a lot of food around holidays. There's always, holidays seem to be very sort of food focused on some level, whether it's, you're celebrating Passover, there's a meal for Passover. It's Rosh Hashanah, there's a meal for Rosh Hashanah. There's, even Thanksgiving and any of those things. But the other thing I sort of realized is, my family used to have regular weekly meals. And it was like my grandparents, it was my mom and dad while they were still married. I didn't have any cousins. There were probably, it was a weekly family meal with probably 10 or 15 people, plus or minus.
Wow.
And that was always a really positive experience. But what I realized is that there was always a focus on food. There was never a get together without food. So, in thinking of, earliest memories with food and my relationship with food, it was very positive. It was usually, celebratory in nature, but even it was present. It was present. It was present at sort of everything. And it seemed to dictate dictate the timetable. So for example, I remember going on vacations and the discussion was, well, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing, but also where we're going to eat lunch, where we're going to eat dinner.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so, again, it was very positive. I didn't feel restricted, or I didn't have someone telling me don't eat this or eat more of that. So, for the most part, it was really positive.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think it sort of created a sort of emotional connection with food that was like a good emotional connection? Or
I totally think so. I mean, I think it definitely, I notice even now, I noticed a couple things. One is I noticed that I tend to, even if I'm not hungry, the first thing that comes into my mind is after a celebratory event is like, oh, let's go eat. Or let's eat something after just to make it even to sort of prolong the event. And that's something I totally get from my dad. And the other thing I notice is that when there are celebrations at my house, that there has to be an abundance of food. Like if I cook, my wife always gives me a hard time. Like, Aaron, you're cooking for like 35 people and 10 coming over. And I'm like, I understand. There's just some like anxiety about not having enough. So, I mean, I definitely noticed those things as an adult. And I think that stems from my childhood for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. So was it the same way in your house growing up that like it was always an abundance and sort of more than was necessary for the amount of people coming or?
Totally. I mean, there's, this sort of notion that, there has to be leftovers.
Right. Yeah, totally. I think that's a common thing I think maybe culturally too, but, I think for a lot of people when they're having people over, I definitely feel that way as well. Like we should have more. We don't want people like scraping the bottom of the plate ever, it's gotta be.
Right. Or running out of something.
Yeah, exactly.
So I definitely noticed that as an adult and looking back on my childhood. What's interesting is even with this abundance of food, there was still, I think once I became a teenager is once I noticed the sort of dichotomy of having too much food, right? Or having a lot of food present, but also don't eat as much. I think that's where I sort of got that first message. I went to see a dietitian when I was, I think 15 or 16, and it was to lose weight. And I remember that it was, the way it was the way it was approached to me was this person helped me. They might be able to help you, and they might be able to help you figure out how to eat just a little bit healthier. It wasn't necessarily like, oh, you're heavy, you need to go, lose weight. It's more about like, I want you to eat healthier.
Right.
And I went to this diet.
It wasn't sort of shamey. It wasn't framed in this shamey way.
No, it wasn't shamey at all. My mom had gone to her. She suggested I go to her, and I went, and it was the worst experience of my life. I hated it. She was, she made me keep a really strict food journal. She put me on a meal plan. She taught me how to like scoop out the dough of a bagel, so if I'm eating a bagel, like to sort of tunnel it. And even now when I see it, I get a little PTSD. I think she even taught me to scoop out like the inside of the potato, just to sort of eat like a shell of it. Very strict diet rules. That's what she taught me. She taught me a lot of strict diet rules. And she also weighed me, but she let me weigh myself like in her bathroom. Like it was actually, I saw her like after her work hours. So I was actually seeing her in her apartment. And like, so I would weigh myself in her like home office, and I lied about my weight every time. I just said it went down like either a half pound or a pound each time. So she thought I was doing great. And I lied on my food journal. I just, I would sort of write it in the car, as I was going to see her. And, I was trying to be the perfect client to make her happy, but I was miserable. It wasn't a good experience at all, and didn't really teach me anything that in the long run was useful.
Right. Right. It's so sad when dietitians reinforce diet rules.
Totally. And what's interesting is, I became a dietitian. So of course I sort of looked up this person, and by the time I was a dietitian, she had passed away. But there were all these really interesting articles about her professing how, in a positive way, how strict she was with food. And, as an adult and as a dietitian, I saw these articles, and again, it just sort of reinforced more of that negative influence from the initial memories that I had.
Yeah. Poor you to have ended up with someone who was, sounds like she was pretty disordered about food herself. So
more than likely.
Yeah.
But again, this is, I'm in my 40s. So that was, 30 some years ago. I don't know if there was a notion of health at every size or intuitive eating back then. So I'm wondering, who were the dietitians out there that were doing something very different?
Right. Right. I know. Actually, that's such an interesting question, because I was just in my intuitive eating online course, someone wrote in with a question and she was like, I have the second edition of intuitive eating and it has a lot of stuff about weight in it. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? And I had recommended the third edition and I've actually never even looked at the second edition. But when she asked that, I went back and was like, oh, like comparing passages and like it was even, whatever that was, I guess 10 years before the third edition was written. So probably in like 1997 or something like that. It was still like talking a lot about weight and sort of like, well, intuitive eating is a way to find, it was sort of that like, it's a way to find your happy weight, but like extra emphasis on the weight and like that was important, and it was interesting to see that from the dietitians who had sort of pioneered this alternative way of relating to food. Cause it's like, wow, if they were relating to it like that and encouraging people to relate to it like that, like, of course, it's, who was then out there championing health at every size. It sort of probably didn't exist in the dietitian, in the dietetics field.
Right.
Or very, very small pockets.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. That's interesting. So it sounds like you kind of ended up in, a shamier situation from this dietitian, not so much from your family, but like she probably fanned the flames of body dissatisfaction.
Yes. And I think it was sort of around then that I noticed that my body was just a little bit different than my friends. I noticed that I was, I played sports but I never got the same physique that my friends had. Mm-hmm. I was still competitive and I was still active and I was still able to do all the things. But I think that's the first time I noticed that a six-pack doesn't come quite easy for me. And I think between that and the dietitian, I think that definitely sort of started to take hold. And again, I think it even took hold probably more once I left home and went to college.
Yeah, what happened then?
So again, like most people who are, leave at home, I found some freedom. Mm-hmm. And so I went to school at University of Colorado. And back then they had, when I lived in the dorm, they had the meal plan there for college students wasn't like a point system. It wasn't like, you had a budget for each month. It was, you're enrolled, you get to eat. There's no limit. Here's a meal card. You can go once each meal, but you can have how much ever you want. So it was like an all you can eat buffet every meal. And, all the sort of foods that, you might not sort of have it at home necessarily, but like we're all of a sudden there. And so I was like, oh, this is fantastic. And, between that and, late night pizzas at, 2 a.m. and on, I definitely, I don't know if it was rebelled, but I definitely just decided that with this newfound freedom, I get to eat whatever I want and how much ever I want. And I really learned how to overeat at that point in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I could see why you're sort of set up for that, coming from that relationship with food and body in high school, and that sense of sort of policing probably around your food.
Yeah. So with all the freedom in the world and with everything, sort of just laid out for me without having to cook it either, I was totally excited. And, that's when I really noticed my weight to start to increase in those college years. And because it did continue throughout the time I was in Colorado. I lived there for about 5 years. I never graduated, but I think that's when I really noticed the trajectory of my weight going up.
Mm-hmm. And did you do anything to try to control it at the time, or?
No. I mean, I was outside. I would sort of tell people I don't care. I don't care what my weight is, but inside I definitely cared. I didn't have, many college girlfriends. I think I probably didn't have any. I mean, I had a great group of friends and we did a lot together, and they never made me at all feel bad, but I sort of missed out on that part of relationships. I noticed that, I sort of limited myself from some activities, especially physical ones, because I thought that maybe my body wouldn't be able to do it. So I definitely noticed at that point in my life, in my early 20s, my late teens, that my body was getting larger and that it wasn't as acceptable. And I became less trusting of my body and what it could do.
Mm. Yeah. And it sounds like it was sort of, you had so much structure in high school and stuff. And then with the total lack of structure and kind of slightly rebellious eating, like you didn't really know which way was up in terms of how to take care of yourself.
Exactly. And that sort of continued throughout my early 20s, until I left Colorado, and because I finally had just dropped out of college because I had no real direction about what I wanted to do. So I dropped out and I came home to LA, and it sort of continued in LA for a few more years.
Yeah, and so what turned things around or like helped you relate to food in a better way?
Well, I wouldn't say it would help me relate to food in a better way, because I remember it was one morning in April, and I can't quite remember the year, but I woke up and I said, I am sick of, and again, this is before Health at Every Size. This is before intuitive eating for me. But I really woke up and I said, I don't want to be in this body anymore. And I remembered everything that this dietitian had taught me, and I started to do it. And so in my mid-20s, I really started to diet. I hadn't really gone into the endeavor much before that. I mean, maybe like sort of dipped my toes in the water of dieting before, but it was then that I sort of really went headfirst into it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I did everything she taught me. I kept a journal. I stopped eating desserts. I cooked. I had, a scoop of brown rice, some chicken breast, some broccoli. That was dinner. I had very sort of set meal patterns, and I started to exercise and I started to move my body. But for the first few months, it was just about dieting. I just went full tilt into dieting just to see what would, to see what would happen.
Yeah. And what did happen?
Well, I did lose weight, and I lost weight pretty quickly. And to me, what was really interesting is I noticed how people really did treat me differently. I noticed how I was praised for the behaviors. I was praised for, I would tell people I was so proud. Like, I haven't had a dessert in 2 months. I haven't had a dessert in 3 months. I haven't had a dessert in 4 months. And people were like, oh, that's so great. You have so much willpower. I can't believe how strong you are. Or the looks that, people would say, oh, you look so much better. Even just strangers would look at me differently. And so I really noticed how, I moved within society and with friends and family in a much different way once I started to lose weight. And that really fueled the dieting behavior until I got to a point where I was, at my lowest adult weight. And it was tough. It was tough. Like I did not, I was very strict about what I ate. I was very strict about exercise. And it came to the point after about a month or two of that, when the scale wouldn't budge anymore, that I can't live like this anymore. It was so intense that I couldn't keep up with the strictness of it. And I said, well, I need to find some sort of balance. So I finally caved after about a year and a half and had a dessert. And obviously the dessert led to, multiple desserts.
The deprivation caught up with you, it sounds like.
Yes, deprivation really caught up with me. And I would say, I didn't say I completely lost control. I really just sort of lost a little bit of control. I didn't give up all the dieting. I just sort of eased up on it. And what was amazing is the weight came back so quickly. I think, the first, I never went back to where I was back in college, and I still haven't, but it definitely started to move in that direction really quickly just by adding a few foods back. And that was really disheartening. I was weighing myself every day, maybe twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. I was in it.
Yeah.
I was not a lot of fun.
Yeah, and really tied to the scale, it sounds like.
Really tight. Oh, I was, yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it because it literally followed me all
Mm.
day.
Yeah, it's upsetting too to have like, such a instrumental relationship with food and your body, and then, make an effort in the direction of balance, hoping that things will not change dramatically, and then they do. And it's like, it totally is understandable that people think, well, I can just never eat these foods then, because clearly, my body, what my body does with them is not normal or whatever. That's
Right. Right. And also it just fueled this, even though I had, was in a thinner body, it really fueled this, it didn't make me more body positive. It made me more actually hate my body a little bit more, to say like, well, why someone else can have a piece of chocolate cake and I can't.
yeah.
And it was like sort of this me versus them, and why can't I? And it didn't make me feel really good about my body at all. And when I started to regain some weight, it was even worse. It was like, oh, this body is just so broken.
Yeah.
So, it was a really big internal struggle that I was having,
Yeah.
and no one else really knew about it.
Mm. Yeah. So you didn't have anyone you confided in about this stuff.
Not really. No, I'm trying to, it's also blurry. And as I said, I'm in my 40s, so I feel like my memory is slowly evaporating.
Yeah.
But I met my wife. We, sort of near the tail end of all this, when I was starting to find some balance. So I wasn't at my lowest, but I wasn't, at my heaviest, but I was definitely, sort of easing up a little bit. And so, I don't even really think I confided in her much to it at the beginning. I mean, now, I do a lot, but when we first started dating, I didn't share a lot with her at all, really, either.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard thing to share when you're just starting out with someone, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then in the midst of all this, I met my wife, and I'm sort of trying to find this balance with food. And I figure, because again, I dropped out of college, I was sort of floundering in a career in the internet world. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And I was like, oh, well, I've lost weight. I could probably help other people lose weight. So I'll become a dietitian, which I'm sure is a common refrain in our profession. I'm sure there are other people out there who have said the same thing.
Yes. Yeah, it's either, I feel like there's a lot of either like, I've lost weight, I can help other people do this, or I want to lose weight and I want to find the secret. So let me do that. Let me study it, which is my trajectory. Right. Like, let me find the magic bullet.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So, so in the midst of all this weird turmoil, I'm back in school at 30 years old to be a dietitian. I quit my other work. I had really went back full time to be a dietitian. Wow. And, when I first came into the field and when I went to school, I thought I was going to be some version of the new Richard Simmons.
Yeah.
I mean, that was really my goal. I wanted to sort of be this person that people looked to help them lose weight and to help them achieve that one unattainable goal.
Right. Yeah. So like a personality that could be devoted to this.
On some level, yeah. I mean, and even if it's not just a personality, but like definitely like the person like in the area you would want to go to because he's been there.
Yeah.
And that's really where I thought my career was going to take me.
That's so interesting. Like, how did you then go in this whole different direction and discover health at every size?
It really is a complete 180 turn. And if you would have told me, when I started school and that I would be doing what I do now, I would probably, that person in the past would probably shake my head and be like, there's no way that you're crazy. This sounds nuts, but okay.
Same here, actually. I was totally, I had a friend actually who's a health at every size person, a journalist. And we would have these arguments about it. And I was like, there's no possible way I would ever, sign off on that. And then 5-6 years later, like total turnaround.
Yeah. So I think what did it for me is first I read intuitive eating. I read intuitive eating when I was a student at Cal State Northridge.
Was it
And
assigned to you or did you just stumble on it?
it was not assigned to me. I think at one point someone had brought it up to me in a lecture. And it wasn't even like in a class lecture. It was like one of those sort of student organizations sponsored things. And I was like, I should probably read this. And I read it, but I didn't really read it. My eyes were moving over the words, but I didn't internalize it because I was still very on some level in my diet mentality. I was still very focused on, counting calories, keeping a food journal. I was still focused on weighing myself every day and helping people lose weight as a career.
And that's so much of what traditional dietetics education teaches too. So it's like,
right.
Yeah,
exactly. And so I read it as a student and I didn't pick it up again until about, I want to say probably about 3 or 4 years into my professional career is when I said, I think I need to read this again. Right after I graduated, I worked at the VA for many years, almost 10 years, doing a lot of different jobs. In that period of time, I was like, I think I need to reread this book. It had sort of come up a little bit more. And I read it, and then I really got it. My analogy that I always give to people is it was like the Matrix, the Matrix. And someone showed me the red pill and they showed me the blue pill. And they said, Aaron, you could take this pill and you could see reality, or you could take this other pill and go back to your fantasy life, but you got to choose. And I took the pill to see reality, at least for me, what is reality. And once I did that, I really couldn't go back. And it started to really question a lot of my beliefs. But when I reread the book the second time, there was so much that spoke to me. Like I was ready to really receive some of it. I felt like someone had followed me around and written this book based on things in my life. And so, I was just ready to hear it. And then it was probably another year or so later that I got into Health at Every Size. So I started with intuitive eating and I moved then, further along the continuum to finding Health at Every Size. And when I read intuitive eating, I sort of had to, I really did have to internalize a lot of it. But I realized that I have to work on this. Like I have to do this myself before I can help anyone do this on their own. Like I need to go through this process. And I did. And it's, I would say it's an ongoing process. I would say it's something I still work on today and always sort of challenging this little voice that's my diet mentality and the food rules. I mean, it's much quieter, but I definitely have to listen to it sometimes and question it and make sure I am keeping it in check. But, I really had to do the work of just going through it and making peace with food.
Yeah. Yeah. So you started to do that work on your own just with the book, would you say? Or
yeah, I started to read the book and I forget how someone gave me a copy also of not just the audiobook, but there was like a session that the co-authors, Lise Resch and Evelyn Tribbley did. And it was, I guess, when they were just sort of starting out with the book at some point or, and they did this sort of all-day seminar and someone recorded it.
Yes. I think I have that.
So I got a copy and I listened to it. And after reading the book and sort of doing the work and listening to the seminar, I was like, wow, these people who wrote this book are not just like, almost like fantasy characters in my head. They're real people. And I should probably reach out to them and just share how meaningful this was. And I did. And it turns out that I was closer to Lise Resch, like geographically. And she says, I have these supervision groups that meet once a month in my office. Would you like to join? And I'm like, yeah, no brainer.
Totally.
And so for many years, I went to her office once a week and would sit with other dietitians and therapists and we would talk about intuitive eating and have bring in our case studies and just talk about different things in the news about dieting, or this sort of fear of gaining weight and being in larger bodies that society portrays. And that space really allowed me to sort of not just internalize it into myself, but how do I teach people this skill? How do I do this for other people? And for a long time in those sessions, I just listened. I didn't feel like I had much to share, but I listened a lot. And it really helped me personally, but it helped me even more professionally about how to have these conversations with clients in a way that isn't shaming, that isn't making an adversarial relationship. It's about partnering with them, and it's about meeting them where they're at and listening to their story and learning from them as much as they're going to learn from you. And that setting really allowed me to learn some of those professional skills that I use now.
That's awesome. What a gift to stumble into that group.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's really interesting. Were you still working at the VA at that time, or?
So, yeah. So, I mean, the interesting thing is, I really did feel like a sheep in wolf's clothing, or a wolf in sheep's clothing, whichever one. I don't know. Anyways, believe it or not, even though as I was embracing all these things, my full-time job was helping run a weight loss program at the VA. And I was trying to reconcile that a lot. And I was like, well, I'm going to infuse a lot of intuitive eating into this program. And I'm going to, not have it just be about the number on the scale, and using a lot of health at every size principles. And finally got to the point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. There's no way in good conscience I can do this anymore with what I know and what I see. Because the hardest part for me as a professional in that setting was the weekly weigh-ins. They'd come to class, and these amazingly compassionate veterans, dealing with so many issues in their lives, from PTSD to, chronic diseases, to food insecurity, to socioeconomic issues, would come in, get on the scale, come in really happy to see me, and then be dejected when they got off the scale. They would say, "Oh, Aaron, I was really bad this week. I don't know what this thing is going to say." And it tortured me because how much it tortured them. And I finally just realized I can't do this anymore. In good conscience, I really need to find something else. And that's where, this is, again, pretty recently, I finally just said, it's coming up on a year that I left the VA to do full-time this kind of work that I'm much more behind, right? I believe in it a lot more, and really sort of follow this almost professional intuition that this is the space I need to be in.
Yeah, I love that. I think I had an episode called Intuitive Eating, Intuitive Everything. And I think it's really,
okay.
Intuitive eating starts to kind of spill over into everything. I think once you learn to listen to it with food, once you learn to.
I totally agree. I mean, at one point, when I was writing a lot more on my blog, I wrote about intuitive exercise and what that felt like.
I love that.
And yeah, I mean, it was very interesting, because you're right, it does spill over into many, many other things.
Yeah, and once you learn to relate to your body in that way, where you're attuning to hunger and fullness cues and noticing how satisfaction feels and all that stuff, it's easy to sort of map that onto something else. Like exercise, I think, is such a perfect next step, because it's oh, right, I can feel the desire for movement, or I can feel when I've had enough, or, kind of all those same principles you're using with hunger and fullness.
Yeah, and I think what intuitive eating brought to me was not just getting in touch with food, but getting in touch with emotions. And I had never really had a tool set to do that. I knew I had emotions, but I didn't quite know how to get attuned to them. That really helped also.
Totally. Yeah. How do you think your gender plays into that? Because I know that I sometimes with male clients that I work with, they're sort of observing that they've never been taught the skill set to do this. Whereas I think with women, it's more of a default. We talk about our feelings with our friends from such a young age,
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. And the clients that have come to see me, the men are, not all the time, but sometimes sort of not quite, they don't have the, like, I think you said it very well. They don't have the tools to deal with some of the emotions that they know that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And so, some of it is basic, right? Is like, well, first, okay, then, what is, I mean, literally, like from the book, like what do you think, if you're eating for an emotion, what is the emotion? What is your need? And this is why I work really closely with therapists. And I tell people when they come to my office, I go, I'm a food guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of this will delve into what will seem like nutrition therapy, but my scope ends, I'm going to make a pretty clear line with you, and I'm not going over my scope. So if this is bringing up all these things for you, it's going to help you to engage in some therapy with, a family therapist, a psychologist, psychiatrist. It doesn't matter who,
Mm-hmm.
but someone who has the tools that I don't have, and we can work together to help you get to the same place.
Mm-hmm.
What I found is that, gender aside, the clients who come to me that have already started some form of therapy, talk therapy or whatever, and come to me and get it a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
It just sort of clicks a little bit quicker. And so with the men that I see, I really do encourage them. I say, as uncomfortable as it might seem and hard to say, I need more help, not less, it's going to help you in the long run. And I think that's the biggest stumbling block for people, is just saying, I need to make myself more vulnerable to another person.
Right.
And, I think it's just challenging. What I talk about is challenging sort of this idea of what is masculine and what is my least favorite phrase, man up. What is being a man is also asking for help and saying, I need a hand with this. This is bigger than just me doing it on my own, like everyone has taught me to do before.
Right. Yeah. Because when you try to do it on your own, it gets you into trouble a lot of the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it's going to, you alluded to it earlier, but, touching on one part, especially when it comes to food, relates to maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 other things in your life.
Totally.
And so it's never, just compartmentalized into one thing. It's so many other things that work in concert with each other.
Right. Yeah. You can see the patterns that you use with food, or your relationship with food, with people, like your marriage or your kids or your work or whatever it is. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's really valuable to have you sort of, in a way, it's like it is what you thought you were going to do, but just in a different way. Like, you've been there, you've had to do this too, sort of do your own work on this stuff. And now you're able to, show people like, here's the path and here's what you need to do to address these issues.
No, I had never really thought about it in that way. So thank you for bringing that up, because you're absolutely right.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting, like the sort of goals we set for ourselves, that like they don't turn out exactly the way we thought, but sometimes there's like a kernel in there sometimes of what we wanted,
But I think that serves me in also in other ways, because I think the fact that I have been open to such a change in my career helps me with clients, because it's just openness. It's, I'm basically, I don't know it all. And, I know some stuff, and the stuff I know, I think I know pretty well, but I don't know it all. And I don't think I ever will. And I think sometimes I find in our profession that there's this notion of, this is what I know, this is the way it should be, and you should follow this way. And I'm very open with people when they come to my office. I say, this is from what I see in both research, but also anecdotally, this is what I see works for people. And I want it to work for you. But if you feel like, hey, this is too crazy for me, that's okay. Let it sit. Maybe it'll be ready for you. Maybe you'll be ready for this some other time, but I'm not going to force you down this path.
And that's so your experience too, and mine as well. Like I definitely feel like firsthand, I understand that people aren't ready for this right away. And sometimes you might go into working with an intuitive eating counselor or something and think like you're ready. And then, oh my God, no, this is like scarier and harder than I ever thought. So like, it's fine to, circle back to it later, like take some time to really process like what's going on and what you're going to need to change.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so powerful to like be able to be present with that. And also, yeah, I think there's a real push in the dietetics profession, it seems, to, make dietitians the nutrition experts. And that's sort of politically motivated. Like the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics wants to set dietitians apart from all the other people calling themselves nutritionists, which is, I get on a certain level. And I think it's good in some ways, although it's like, I feel like you can select a dietitian because dietitians have like this extra degree of knowledge that some sort of nutritionist who just did an online program or something doesn't have. But then how do you control for like point of view and, their personal take on the research or whatever? Like that's also hard to quantify and find. So
absolutely.
So I wouldn't say across the board that dietitians should be like these experts either, because, it's just, we all have our point of view and we all have different ways of working with clients that could be better or not as effective.
Right. Right.
But yeah, I mean, of course, I think probably any dietitians who are listening to this are already questioning like the status quo of weight loss and helping people lose weight, which I think we can agree is like not the way dietitians should approach things. But it certainly takes a while to undo that point of view too.
I think it doesn't. The interesting thing I am seeing now is, these terms, intuitive eating, health at every size, they're becoming more aware.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people are more aware of them. People are hearing them a little bit more. The difficult thing that I see is that there's still this notion, though, and I see it more with things like mindful eating now. Mindful eating is going to be a great tool for you to lose weight.
Right.
And that really sort of makes me shudder. It makes me a little upset.
Me too.
Fuels my fire a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But, because I'm hoping that over time that, this weight neutral approach does permeate more into all of these things, because I think that if I look at my career now and what really resonates with me now is this notion that, all bodies deserve, can have, and are capable of achieving health.
Yes.
And that will look different for each person. There's not a one size fits all, but the sooner we can, as a culture and especially as a profession, wrap our head around that, I think the better off it will serve all of the clients that we work with.
Totally.
And I think that's a hard message for a lot of people to get their head around. When I talk about health at every size, people are like, yeah, but the person who's 400 pounds and whatever, they are not healthy.
Right.
I was like, well, how do you know that? Can we just put our judgment aside and just see the person instead of their size?
Totally. Because someone's size doesn't tell you what their labs look like or what their, the health of their heart or their lung capacity or all this stuff that's way more important.
And so, it's hopefully something that will continue to sort of change, but I think it's going to take a lot of voices and it's going to take a lot of uphill rock pushing.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think it's getting muddy. I feel like it's got to probably like anything else, the waters are going to get real muddy before everything settles and is clear again, because I think right now, because it's becoming so mainstream to be body positive and, corporations are taking that message and using it to advertise and, all this stuff is sort of getting co-opted, not necessarily in a bad way. And some of it, I love the JCPenney ad, for example, I think is amazing. And, that's an example of using body positivity to sell stuff that actually works in my mind. Yeah. But then there's all these different degrees of that. And also like you said, the mindful eating being used for weight loss. It's just oh God, it's so antithetical to the point of these practices. Intuitive eating is not about weight loss. It's about pushing back on the diet mentality, which is, diet mentality is about intentional weight loss. Intuitive eating has no stance on weight loss, and that's how it should be. Right. But exactly, it's it's tough to navigate this world, especially at the beginning when you're Googling around for resources, you might stumble on someone who's, kind of got a weight loss spin on intuitive eating, but you might not know that until you're sort of in it,
Right.
Which,
right.
Not that you have to like take a perfect first step by any means. And maybe that kind of first step is actually what's helpful for some people who are so in it, who are so in the diet mentality that they couldn't possibly make the leap to full-blown weight neutrality right away. But yeah, I think it's going to be challenging to navigate all this stuff as it becomes more mainstream.
Right.
So yeah, I know it's an interesting time to be a part of this community, but
it is. And I'm just so thankful that there are so many voices. One of the things that when Glennis and I talk is we always share, how refreshing it is that all these voices that, you would seem on surface level, you would be like, oh no, that they're like a competitor. They're also trying to do this, or they're also have a business to this. Everyone has been so supportive and collaborative and willing to offer support, because what I think we all want is just more voices saying this message. And there's enough for all of us to go around.
Totally.
That's been really refreshing to me, because it feels like, on some level, it feels like I found a community where I mean, no pun intended, fit in.
Right.
Where, there is this sort of willingness to be vulnerable, willingness to sort of not be perfect, willingness to spread a message that is very helpful to people, and willing to collaborate with all different sorts of people to make that message accessible to everyone.
Totally. Yeah, I do. I think it's a really wonderful community too. And I've been pleasantly surprised pretty much at every turn how like supportive and, like you said, sort of non-competitive people are in this space. Because there really is more than enough to go around. And, unfortunately, but like maybe one day this message will be just very mainstream, and that'll be amazing too, that if that's like the status quo then of dietitians is like to help people achieve health at every size instead of, make them lose weight or whatever, that'll be nice. But yeah, I think it's really fascinating how, different this community is and different the approach is to the status quo. And it's a good model. I think it's like good modeling for people to have, to see like clinicians or experts in this field being vulnerable and being collaborative. And like you said, just
absolutely
not knowing all the answers,
Yep.
Not being
totally
not holding themselves out as experts. So tell me about Dietitians Unplugged and how you guys started that.
Dietitians Unplugged is a podcast I host with another dietitian, Glennis Oyston. And
yeah, she's been a podcast guest too.
I heard the episode is great.
Yeah,
I love listening to her and your conversation together. So we met actually at the VA. So I was her preceptor when she was an intern.
Nice.
And I think within the first week or 2 weeks, it came up that we both knew about intuitive eating and we both knew about health at every size. And I think from then on, we just sort of realized, okay, we can, sort of roll our eyes together at some of the stuff that we hear. And I found a partner on some level. And so
that's so valuable in a space like that too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it was like we had like a secret handshake almost, And so I think basically about a year ago when I left the VA and I was talking to Glennis more and more about, sort of trying to do new things and be creative in business ventures, I said, what if we do a podcast? Like, let's start a podcast together. And that's really how it started. And we just sort of thought about, okay, what do we want to talk about? How do we want to do this? The thing that we decided was that we wanted to be informal. We wanted to make it accessible to a lot of different people, that we didn't want it to be like too research driven, but, too informal where, we weren't talking about anything of substance, but we just wanted to basically feel like you were sitting down with, some sort of beverage, sitting down with a friend and listening to a conversation. And so we decided that we would kick around some names, and we realized, hey, Dietitians Unplugged sort of sounds exactly what we're doing. We're just sort of, at the end of the day, we're unplugging and we're just sharing our thoughts unfiltered with each other. And hopefully some people will will resonate with that. And we've done about 11, 12 episodes so far. And we basically, we come up with a question before for each of us, like a theme question.
Mm-hmm.
And then we spend some time very briefly talking about it. And then we just turn on the mics and go.
I love it. And it does have that quality too. It's like, it seems like listening to a conversation between old friends who are both, really knowledgeable in this arena, but it's not like so research driven that you can't follow it. It's like the right balance, I think, of science and conversationalism.
And it's been so much fun. It's been more fun than I thought it would be. And it's probably been one of the most exciting things I've done professionally. She's great. And I love everything that she says.
Mm-hmm.
And I love sort of our banter back and forth together. And I love that we can, throw out an occasional curse word here and there.
Totally.
And it feels like a very safe environment when we talk. She makes me laugh. I make her laugh. It's great.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot of great moments in it, like a lot of laughs, a lot of knowledge too. And
yeah,
I love it. People should totally check it out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
yeah.
Where can people find it?
The best place is to find us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page, Dietitians Unplugged, and that's where we release all of our episodes. We're also on iTunes. So if you search for us on iTunes, you can subscribe in iTunes as well as Stitcher, where those are the two main areas where you can subscribe.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to also know what else is going on, you can check us out on Facebook.
Awesome. And then where can people find you in your private practice?
My practice is in Calabasas, California, which is out here in LA.
Mm-hmm.
My website is www.bvmrd.com. So it's balance, variety, moderation, rd.com. I've made a pact with myself to start writing a whole lot more. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be blogging a lot in the next, as long as I can keep it up, let's put it that way. But I've realized that for a little while now, my own writing voice, I was sort of stifling on my own, just for fear of really saying some of the things I sort of need to say. And I've decided I'm not going to do that anymore. And so I'm just going to write some stuff and hopefully people will read it. And if they don't, that's fine, but I'm going to write it anyway.
I love it. And I've read some of it and it's awesome. I think your voice needs to be out there. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. People should totally check it out. Oh, well, thank you so much, Aaron. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Christy. I really appreciate you having me on, and I want to thank you for doing all the work you're doing. I mean, you have this amazing podcast, and it's reaching so many people. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I love doing it too. So that's our show. Thanks again so much to our guest for being here. And thanks to you guys for listening. You can find us online at christyharrison.com/foodpsych. Follow us on Twitter at foodpsychpod and like us on Facebook. We're at facebook.com/foodpsych. We'll be back again soon with another main episode, and you can get our bonus episodes on our Patreon page. Just go to patreon.com/foodpsych. That's patreon.com/foodpsych. And sign up at the premium levels to get our Ask Food Psych bonus episodes. The music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL, and the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no work in the kitchen now. Who put you there in that perfect position now? Bullies want your food, and you ain't really beat. Have you ever went over your friend's house?